Injustice, the story of the NCAA.
The average top 20 college football coach took home approximately $4.7 million in 2015. CBS is paying $800 million a year for the right to air college basketball games on their network. The organization that regulated all generated $1 billion in revenue in 2014, and the players, they're paid nothing, not a cent.
Students just like you are being exploited every day by a system that profits handsomely when they perform and throws them away when they can't. Imagine it were your friend, sibling, child, or even you being exploited. Maybe it was that brilliant idea you had at work, which you never received credit for. Now imagine the exploiter was an organization created to protect you.
Over the next 4 minutes, we'd like to share our thoughts on why the very nature of National Collegiate Athletic Association, more colloquially referred to as the NCAA, is unjust. Specifically, we'll explore how much money there is to be made in college sports, what exactly it means to be a student athlete, and how the players are compensated. By the conclusion of this video, we hope that you are convinced that the current system exploits student athletes and why they deserve to be compensated just like any employee. Ultimately, the blame falls on the NCAA, as they are the ones who coined the term student athlete and enforce the restrictions that come with it.
So now you might be asking, how much money is there in college sports? The answer? Roughly $1 billion in revenue in 2014, the majority of which was spent on extravagant stadiums, unnecessary equipment, and salaries, leaving only $80 million in profit. In fact, the 15 largest stadiums in the US don't belong to professional basketball or football teams. They belong to college teams. The $226 million renovation of Michigan Stadium turned it into the largest stadium in the world outside of North Korea. Even more outrageous is that roughly 60% of coaches in NCAA basketball and football earned more than $1 million last year, with top salaries exceeding $7 million. What about NCAA President Mark Emmett? He earned $1.6 million in 2014. How does that compare to the salary of every NCAA student athlete in America? Trick question. You can't divide 1.6 million by 0.
First and foremost, student athletes are students and not employees. That means they are not entitled to workers' compensation if they get injured. So when basketball phenom Kyle Hartrick got injured during his freshman year at the University of Oklahoma, his scholarship was canceled and he was left owing thousands in medical bills. Second, student athletes are obligated to adhere to a 420-page rulebook. And third and most importantly, they are prohibited from receiving compensation in any form whatsoever, which is why NCAA basketball player Shabazz Napier said this in a post-game interview.
Like I said, there's hungry nights where I'm not able to eat, and but I still got to play up to my capabilities. There are hungry nights that I go to bed and I'm starving.
Or Jamar Samuels, who got suspended by the NCAA for one of the most important games of his college career because he asked his former Summer Leagues coach Curtis Malone for $200. Why did he knowingly violate NCAA rules? As Malone stated in an interview, the kid's family doesn't have anything and he called me for money to eat. Their performance directly contributes to the outrageous compensation made by everyone involved in NCAA sports, while they themselves are struggling to find their next meal. Calling this a travesty would be an understatement.
Well, now you might be thinking, aren't the players paid in other ways? Well, the NCAA believes that scholarships are the only form of compensation student athletes should receive, as paying them further will shift the focus from academics to athletics. But when current NFL player and 2011 Stanford graduate Richard Sherman was asked whether student athletes are able to take advantage of their free education, he replied, no. When you wake up in the morning, you have weights, then class, then after class you go straight to meetings, then practice. You are not on scholarship for school, and that's what the coaches tell you every day. Not to mention their free education is often taken away the moment they get injured. Now you might be thinking that they're gaining valuable experience that will help them go pro someday. But only 1.6% of college football players and 1.2% of basketball players actually make it pro. To recap, student athletes are always at risk of getting injured and losing their scholarship. Most don't have time to do well in school or even complete their degree, and only the best of the best actually go pro.
What needs to be done? The NCAA needs to change the rules governing student athletes and compensate them for the time, effort, and risks involved in playing. Paying student athletes even a few $1,000s per semester would be sufficient, barely noticeable for an organization generating $1 billion a year, but possibly life-changing for student athletes struggling to find their next meal.
Because there's only one game where it's acceptable for athletes to play hungry.